My husband's best friend said I was too successful for a wife. I made sure his wife became successful too. My husband's best friend Luke started coming over more after I got promoted to regional director at my company. He'd sit in our living room drinking beer and making comments about how unnatural it was for a woman to make more than her husband. He'd tell my husband Thomas that I was emasculating him by being the breadwinner. He actually used that word, emasculating. Like my success somehow shrunk Thomas's manhood. Luke would say things like real men don't let their wives outshine them, and that Thomas needed to put his foot down before I lost all respect for him. He'd bring up articles about divorce rates being higher when women earned more, and tell Thomas I'd probably leave him for someone more successful eventually. Thomas would laugh it off, but I could see Luke's words were getting to him. He started making passive-aggressive comments about my work hours, and asking if I really needed to attend conferences. Luke had been married to his wife Rebecca for 10 years and constantly bragged about how she knew her place. She worked part-time as a receptionist, and according to Luke, that was perfect, because she had time to keep the house clean, and didn't threaten his position as the provider. He'd actually tell Thomas in front of me that Rebecca understood that a man needs to feel like a man, and my ambition was toxic to our marriage. He said successful women were bitter and alone for a reason, and Thomas was lucky I hadn't left him yet for someone at my level. The comments got worse after I bought Thomas a new car for his birthday with my bonus. Luke spent an hour telling Thomas how humiliating it must be to drive a car his wife paid for. He said real men buy their own cars, and letting me pay made Thomas look weak. He actually convinced Thomas to consider returning it because people would judge him for being kept by his wife. That's when I decided Luke needed to experience what he was so afraid of. I knew Rebecca from neighborhood gatherings, and she'd mentioned wanting to go back to school, but Luke always said they couldn't afford it. The truth was Luke controlled all their finances and didn't want her to have a career. I started inviting Rebecca for coffee when Luke was at work. I'd casually mention the continuing education program at my company that paid full tuition for employees and their families. I told her we had an opening in accounting that didn't require experience, just someone willing to learn. Rebecca was interested but said Luke would never approve. I suggested she could start the program without telling him since it was online and see how she felt about it. I helped her apply for the position and she got it immediately. She was smart and eager, just held back by Luke's insecurity. Rebecca started working while Luke thought she was at her part-time job. She'd leave in her receptionist clothes and change in her car. The online classes were in the evenings when Luke thought she was at book club. Within 6 months, Rebecca was thriving. She got promoted to junior accountant and was making more than her receptionist job ever paid. She opened her own bank account and started saving money. Luke had no idea his submissive wife was building a career behind his back. The revelation came at Luke's birthday dinner. He'd been bragging all night about how Thomas had finally started standing up to me and limiting my work travel. He said Thomas was learning to be the man in the relationship thanks to his guidance. He went on about how marriages work better when women remember their supporters, not leaders. That's when Rebecca announced she'd gotten promoted to senior accountant. Luke laughed, thinking it was a joke, until she showed him her business card from my company. She made $20,000 more than Luke now and would be making double his salary within 2 years. Luke's face went from confused to angry. He demanded to know when this happened, and Rebecca calmly explained she'd been working there for 8 months. She'd taken classes, gotten certified, and built a whole career while he thought she was shelving books at the library. She thanked me publicly for mentoring her and showing her that women could be successful without permission from insecure men. Luke tried to forbid her from continuing, but Rebecca laughed. She'd already used her signing bonus to retain a divorce lawyer because she knew he'd react this way. She said years of watching him tear down successful women, especially me, made her realize he'd never support her dreams. She'd heard every nasty thing he said about ambitious women, and knew that's exactly what she wanted to become. Luke looked at Thomas for support, but Thomas just shrugged. Luke stood up screaming that Rebecca was having an affair with me, and that's why I'd helped her, accusing us of being secret lovers who'd planned this whole thing to humiliate him. Thomas actually grabbed Luke and shoved him, yelling that Luke had been poisoning our marriage for years, and he was done listening to his toxic advice about controlling women. That's when Luke smiled and pulled out his phone. Luke's holding his phone with this weird smile, and I feel my stomach drop because whatever he's about to show us isn't good. Thomas lets go of Luke and steps back, looking confused and angry at the same time. Luke starts talking about how he knew something was going on, and he's been documenting everything. He's tapping at his phone screen while everyone at the table sits frozen, watching him. Rebecca's face has gone completely white, and she's gripping the edge of the table, so hard her knuckles look like they might break through her skin. Luke's parents are looking between their son and Rebecca, with these confused expressions like they can't figure out what's happening. Thomas moves closer to me and I can feel the tension coming off him in waves. Luke finally turns his phone around and starts showing us photos. There are pictures of me and Rebecca sitting at different coffee shops over the past few months. He's got at least 20 photos, maybe more, and each one has a timestamp and location stamp at the bottom. Some are from that place near my office, others from the cafe by the library, a few from the restaurant downtown where we had lunch that one time. Thomas takes the phone from Luke and scrolls through the photos, his eyebrows pulling together as he tries to understand what Luke thinks this proves. I look at the photos too, and they're just normal pictures of two women having coffee and talking. In some of them we're laughing, In others, we're looking at Rebecca's laptop, probably going over her coursework or job applications. Luke's been following us or checking up on Rebecca's location to get these shots. Some of the angles are from across the street or through windows, like he was hiding while he took them. The creepy factor of this hits me, and I feel sick thinking about Luke stalking us with his phone camera. Thomas hands the phone back to Luke and asks what the hell he's trying to say with these pictures. Luke gets this satisfied look on his face and announces that he's been tracking Rebecca's location through her phone for years. He pulls up a map on his phone that's covered in little dots. Each dot marks a place Rebecca has been, and there are hundreds of them going back months or maybe years. He zooms in on the map and shows all the times Rebecca was at my office building when she was supposedly at her receptionist job. The dots cluster around my company's address, showing she was there multiple times a week for months. Luke's pointing at the screen like this is some kind of evidence of a crime. The other dinner guests have gone completely silent. Luke's parents are staring at the phone, his mom's mouth hanging open slightly. The couple sitting next to them, some friends of Luke's from work, are looking down at their plates like they want to disappear. Rebecca stands up so fast her chair scrapes loudly against the floor. She tells Luke that tracking her location without her knowledge is exactly why she's leaving him. Her voice is shaking, but she's not backing down. She says his need to control and monitor her. Every move is abusive, and she's done living under surveillance. Luke reaches out and tries to grab her arm, but Thomas steps between them before Luke can touch her. Thomas tells Luke not to touch her, and his voice has this edge to it I've never heard before. Luke backs up a step, still holding his phone up like it's a weapon or shield. He shifts tactics completely and claims the photos prove Rebecca and I are having an affair. He says this whole career thing is just a cover story for our relationship. He actually says that no woman helps another woman this much unless there's something romantic going on. I laugh because I can't help it. His desperation to explain this any way except the obvious truth is pathetic. He can't accept that I helped Rebecca because women should support each other, or because his behavior was wrong. He has to make it into something sexual because that's the only way his brain can process why I'd care about his wife's success. Thomas tells Luke he's insane, and that helping someone get a job isn't evidence of an affair. He says Luke's been poisoning their friendship for years with paranoid garbage about controlling women, and he's finally seeing how sick Luke's thinking really is. Thomas's face is red and he's breathing hard like he's been running. Luke looks genuinely shocked that Thomas isn't taking his side. He tries to argue, but Thomas cuts him off and tells him he's done listening to his toxic advice. The restaurant manager appears at our table and quietly asks if everything is okay. She's a small woman in a black suit and she's trying to be polite, but I can tell she wants us to either calm down or leave. She mentions that other diners are complaining about the disturbance. Luke's still holding his phone up, waving it around like his location tracking data is some kind of smoking gun that proves something. Rebecca picks up her purse and coat from the back of her chair. She tells everyone at the table that she's leaving. Her voice is steadier now, more determined. I stand up because she shouldn't have to deal with Luke alone right now. Thomas immediately says he's coming too and pulls out his wallet, throwing cash on the table for our meals without even counting it. Luke's parents just sit there looking mortified, not saying anything to stop us or defend their son. The other guests are staring at their plates or at the wall, anywhere but at us. The three of us walk toward the exit together, me on one side of Rebecca and Thomas on the other. I can hear Luke starting to say something behind us, but we don't stop or turn around. The restaurant feels too hot and too crowded, and I just want to get Rebecca somewhere safe. We push through the front door and the cool night air hits my face. The parking lot is half empty and the streetlights cast weird shadows across the pavement. Rebecca breaks down crying the second we're outside. She's apologizing over and over for ruining everyone's evening. I hug her and tell her she didn't ruin anything, that Luke's behavior ruined his own birthday dinner. Thomas stands a few feet away looking stunned, like he's still processing everything he just witnessed about his best friend. He keeps running his hand through his hair and staring back at the restaurant door like he can't believe what just happened. Rebecca pulls away from me and wipes her eyes with the back of her hand. She says she needs to go somewhere safe because Luke has keys to her lawyer's office building and knows where her sister lives. The fear in her voice is real and immediate. I offer our guest room right away without even thinking about it. Thomas nods in agreement without any hesitation. We walk to our car and Rebecca gets in the back seat while Thomas and I get in front. As Thomas starts the engine, I look back at the restaurant and see Luke standing in the doorway, his phone still in his hand, watching us drive away. At our house, Rebecca sits on the couch in our living room and her hands shake as she holds her phone. Thomas brings her a glass of water and sits down next to her. She takes a sip and sets the glass on the coffee table. I sit in the armchair across from them and wait for her to be ready to talk. Rebecca looks at her phone screen and then back at us. She tells us Luke installed tracking software on her phone at least 3 years ago, maybe longer. She discovered the app buried in her settings about 2 years ago, when her phone was acting weird and draining battery fast. The app was disguised as a system update notification that she couldn't delete. Rebecca says she wanted to disable it or get a new phone, but Luke would have gotten an alert the second the tracking stopped. He would have known she found it and she was terrified of what he'd do. She shows us the app on her phone and how it records everywhere she goes with timestamps. Every coffee shop where we met is marked on the map. Every trip to my office building is documented. Luke could see in real time where she was at any moment of any day for years. Thomas stares at the phone screen and his face goes pale. He asks why she didn't tell anyone or go to the police. Rebecca explains that Luke controlled all their money and she had nowhere to go. Her family lives 3 states away, and she had no savings of her own until she started working. She was trapped and monitored constantly like a prisoner. I feel sick looking at the tracking data and thinking about how Luke watched her movements for years. Thomas stands up and starts pacing around the living room. He keeps running his hands through his hair and saying he can't believe this. He stops pacing and turns to face both of us. He apologizes over and over for bringing Luke into our lives. He says he thought Luke's comments about gender roles and women working were just old-fashioned thinking from how Luke grew up. He never imagined Luke was actually abusive toward Rebecca. Thomas sits back down and puts his head in his hands. He tells Rebecca he should have seen the signs and he's sorry he didn't protect her from Luke. Rebecca reaches over and touches his arm. She tells him it's not his fault because Luke was careful to hide the worst of his behavior. She says Luke acted one way around friends and completely different at home when no one could see. Thomas looks genuinely shaken, like he's realizing his best friend of 15 years was someone he never really knew. Rebecca picks up her phone again and scrolls through her contacts. She finds her divorce lawyer's number and taps the call button. She puts it on speaker so we can all hear. A woman answers after 2 rings and says this is Ramona. Rebecca explains what happened at the dinner and how Luke showed everyone the tracking data. She tells Ramona about the photos Luke took of us having coffee and how he's been following her movements for years. Ramona asks if Rebecca is somewhere safe right now, and Rebecca says she's at our house. Ramona's voice gets serious and she tells Rebecca not to go home tonight under any circumstances. The location tracking without Rebecca's knowledge or consent is illegal in our state and could strengthen her case significantly. Ramona says she'll start preparing an emergency restraining order first thing tomorrow morning. Rebecca asks if she can stay with us for a few days until the restraining order gets filed and approved. I immediately say yes before she even finishes asking. Thomas nods in agreement and tells Rebecca she can stay as long as she needs. Ramona says she'll call Rebecca tomorrow morning to discuss next steps and reminds her to save any messages or calls from Luke. Rebecca thanks her and ends the call. We sit in silence for a few minutes and nobody knows what to say. Rebecca looks exhausted and I can see the fear in her eyes. Thomas gets up and shows Rebecca to our guest room. He brings her clean towels and tells her to help herself to anything in the kitchen. Rebecca thanks us both and closes the guest room door. Thomas and I go to our bedroom, but neither of us can sleep. We lie in bed staring at the ceiling and processing everything that happened tonight. Around midnight, my phone starts buzzing on the nightstand. I pick it up and see 3 text messages from Luke. The first one says I ruined his marriage on purpose because I'm jealous of happy couples. The second one accuses me of having an affair with Rebecca and corrupting her against him. The third one threatens to tell everyone at my company that I'm unprofessional and pursue inappropriate relationships with employees. I show the messages to Thomas and his phone starts buzzing too. Thomas reads his messages and his jaw clenches. Luke sent him a long paragraph about betrayal and how I corrupted both Rebecca and Thomas against him. Luke writes that Thomas chose his wife over his best friend and he'll regret it. Another message comes through calling Thomas weak and controlled. Thomas blocks Luke's number after reading the first few messages. He tells me to save the threatening texts for Ramona. My phone buzzes again with 2 more messages from Luke. These alternate between accusing me of destroying his family and threatening to ruin my professional reputation. I save screenshots of everything and then block his number too. We can hear Rebecca's phone buzzing constantly in the guest room. Thomas gets up and knocks softly on her door. Rebecca opens it and her face is red from crying. Her phone screen shows 12 missed calls from Luke just in the last 10 minutes. Thomas takes her phone and shows her how to block Luke's number. Rebecca hesitates because she's afraid of making him angrier. Thomas gently explains that she needs to protect herself, and Luke's already as angry as he's going to get. Rebecca nods and lets Thomas block the number. We all try to sleep, but Luke keeps calling and texting from different numbers. By morning, Rebecca's phone shows 47 missed calls from various numbers we don't recognize. She has dozens of text messages ranging from apologetic to threatening. Some messages beg her to come home and talk. Others call her terrible names and blame her for everything. A few threaten to make her life difficult if she goes through with the divorce. Rebecca calls Ramona at 8 in the morning, and Ramona tells her to save everything but not respond to any messages. Ramona explains that Luke's harassment will help their case for the restraining order. We help Rebecca take screenshots of every message and missed call with timestamps. She forwards everything to Ramona's email address for documentation. Thomas takes the day off work to help Rebecca get her essential belongings from her house. He calls his boss and explains there's a family emergency. I decide to go with them for support and backup. We wait until 9:30 when we know Luke will be at his job. Thomas drives and I sit in the back seat with Rebecca. She gives us directions to her house and her hands shake the whole drive. The house is in a neighborhood similar to ours, but the houses are smaller. Rebecca's house is a pale blue ranch style with white trim. The lawn is perfectly cut and there are no weeds in the flower beds. Everything looks neat and controlled from the outside. Rebecca unlocks the front door and we step inside. The house is eerily quiet and clean. Everything has its exact place like a museum display. The living room furniture is arranged symmetrically, and there are no personal items or clutter anywhere. Rebecca leads us to the bedroom and starts pulling clothes from her closet. Thomas finds boxes in the garage and brings them to the bedroom. We work quickly, packing clothes, shoes, and personal items. Rebecca grabs her laptop from the home office and important documents from a filing cabinet. She takes photos of her parents and grandparents from the dresser. We move efficiently, knowing Luke could come home early. Thomas carries boxes to the car while Rebecca and I continue packing. In the closet, Rebecca finds a notebook tucked behind some shoe boxes. She opens it and her face goes white. She hands the notebook to me and I start reading. Luke tracked every dollar Rebecca spent for years. Each page has dates and itemized lists of purchases with his comments written next to them. A $12 face cream is marked excessive in red pen. Books she bought are labeled unnecessary. A coffee with a friend has a note saying wasteful spending. Page after page documents Rebecca's purchases with Luke's judgmental commentary. Thomas comes back inside and I show him the notebook. He flips through the pages and looks physically ill. He sits down on the bed and keeps reading Luke's obsessive documentation of Rebecca's life. There are pages tracking how much time Rebecca spent at the grocery store, notes about her driving routes and why she took certain roads, lists of phone calls she made with durations, and Luke's guesses about who she was talking to. Rebecca opens Luke's desk drawer in the home office and finds a folder. Inside are printed articles about monitoring your spouse's phone and computer activity. Sections about tracking software are highlighted in yellow. Articles about checking browser histories have notes in the margins. There's a printed guide for installing hidden cameras. Thomas takes photos of everything with his phone. He says this needs to be documented for the divorce proceedings and possibly for criminal charges. Rebecca looks around the home office and realizes Luke probably has cameras installed. We search quickly and find a small camera hidden in a bookshelf pointed at the computer desk. Thomas takes photos of the camera and its position. We finish packing the essential items and load everything into Thomas's car. Rebecca takes one last look at the house and I can see the relief on her face. She tells us she can't believe she lived like that for 10 years. She didn't see how abnormal it was until she started working at my company and seeing how other people lived. Normal couples don't track each other's spending down to individual items. Normal husbands don't install hidden cameras and tracking software. She says working with other women at the office and having her own money showed her what freedom looked like. We leave before Luke gets home from work. Rebecca seems lighter already, away from that controlled environment. Thomas drives back to our house and we unload Rebecca's belongings into the guest room. That afternoon, Ramona calls and says she filed the emergency restraining order. The judge reviewed the location tracking evidence and threatening messages. The restraining order got granted within hours. A sheriff's deputy will serve Luke at his workplace this afternoon. Rebecca says Luke will be completely humiliated because he cares so much about his professional image. Being served at work in front of his coworkers will destroy the reputation he's so careful to maintain. That evening around 8, headlights swing into our driveway. I look out the window and see Luke's truck parked behind Thomas's car, blocking us in. Rebecca freezes on the couch where she's been reading through apartment listings on her laptop. Thomas stands up immediately and pulls out his phone. Luke pounds on the front door hard enough that the frame shakes. He yells Rebecca's name over and over, demanding she come out and talk to him like an adult. I walk to the door but keep it locked, telling Luke through the wood that he needs to leave right now. He screams that I destroyed everything, that his marriage was perfect until I got my promotion, and started filling Rebecca's head with ideas about being independent. Thomas is already on the phone with the police dispatcher, giving our address and explaining there's a restraining order violation in progress. Luke kicks the door and the sound echoes through the house. He shouts that everything was fine before I decided to play career woman and emasculate Thomas. He says Thomas was happy before I started making more money and turning Rebecca against him. Rebecca sits frozen on the couch, her face pale and her hands shaking. I stay by the door and keep telling Luke to leave, that the police are coming and he's making everything worse for himself. He responds by saying this is all my fault, that I'm going to pay for what I did to his marriage and his friendship with Thomas. The police arrive within 6 minutes. 2 patrol cars pull up with lights flashing. Luke is still yelling on the front porch when the officers get out. One officer approaches Luke while the other comes to the door to talk to us. I open the door and explain about the restraining order that was served this afternoon. The officer asks if we have documentation, and Thomas shows him the photos on his phone of the restraining order paperwork. The officer at the door radios to his partner about the restraining order. Luke is arguing with the other officer, claiming he just wants to talk to his wife and work things out. The officer tells Luke that violating a restraining order is a crime regardless of his intentions. Luke points at our house and yells that I'm a manipulator who seduced his wife and turned her against him. The officer asks Luke to put his hands behind his back. Luke actually tries to push past the officer to get to our door. The officer grabs Luke's arm and forces him to turn around. Within seconds, Luke is in handcuffs. Luke screams the entire time they walk him to the patrol car. He yells that this is all my fault, and he's going to make sure everyone knows what kind of person I really am. He says I destroyed his life and his marriage because I couldn't stand seeing another woman happy in her place. Thomas stands in the doorway watching them put Luke in the back of the patrol car. The officer comes back to get our statements and we explain everything that happened. Rebecca stays inside, not wanting to see Luke at all. After the police leave with Luke, Thomas sits down on the couch and puts his head in his hands. He tells me he feels like he never really knew Luke at all. He says the person screaming on our porch was a stranger, not the friend he'd known for 15 years. Rebecca apologizes for bringing this chaos into our home, but I tell her none of this is her fault. Luke made his own choices, and now he's facing the consequences. Over the next 3 days, Luke's parents call Thomas 5 times. His mother leaves voicemails asking Thomas to please call back because they need to talk about Luke. His father sends texts saying the family needs to work together to help Luke through this difficult time. Thomas finally answers on the 4th call, and Luke's mother immediately starts talking about how Luke is under so much stress and just needs support right now. She suggests Thomas could talk to Rebecca about dropping the restraining order, so Luke can apologize properly. Thomas tells her firmly that Luke's behavior toward Rebecca was abusive and controlling. He explains the location tracking, the financial control, the obsessive monitoring of everything Rebecca did. Luke's mother gets quiet and then says marriages have problems, and Rebecca should have tried harder to make Luke feel secure. Thomas responds that making your spouse feel secure doesn't involve tracking their every movement and documenting their purchases in a notebook. Luke's father takes the phone and his voice is angry. He says Thomas is choosing some woman he barely knows over a friendship that goes back to childhood. Thomas explains that he's choosing to stand against abuse and control, that he can't maintain a friendship with someone who treats women the way Luke treated Rebecca. Luke's father calls Thomas several names and hangs up. They don't call again. Rebecca settles into our guest room and her routine becomes almost normal. She leaves for work every morning in professional clothes she bought with her own money. She comes home and makes dinner with me sometimes, talking about projects at work and training sessions she's attending. 2 weeks into her stay, she gets called into her supervisor's office. She comes home that evening smiling wider than I've seen since the birthday dinner. She got promoted to senior accountant with a 12% raise. Katie from the training department told her supervisor that Rebecca picks up new concepts faster than anyone she's trained in 3 years. Rebecca's confidence grows every day. She walks differently now, with her shoulders back and her head up. She makes decisions about what to eat and where to go without checking with anyone. She buys things she wants without justifying the expense. Thomas comments one evening that it's like watching someone learn to breathe for the first time. Rebecca opens a savings account at a different bank than the one Luke used and sets up automatic deposits from her paycheck. She has her own money that no one else can see or control or judge. Luke starts posting on social media about betrayal and abandonment. His posts don't name anyone specifically, but they're obviously about us. He writes about how his wife left him without warning, and his best friend chose a woman over their lifelong friendship. He posts articles about the importance of male friendship and loyalty. He shares quotes about how modern women don't value marriage anymore. Several mutual friends reach out to Thomas asking what actually happened, because Luke's posts make it sound like Rebecca just decided to leave for no reason. Thomas decides to tell the truth when people ask. He's done protecting Luke's reputation at Rebecca's expense. When his friend Mark calls asking what's going on, Thomas explains the location tracking app Luke installed on Rebecca's phone. He tells Mark about the notebook documenting every purchase Rebecca made. He describes how Luke showed up at our house violating the restraining order and got arrested. Mark is shocked into silence for several seconds before saying he had no idea Luke was capable of that kind of behavior. Most people respond with support and concern. Thomas's cousin Sarah calls to check on Rebecca and offers to help her find furniture for her new apartment. Our neighbor Dave stops by to tell Thomas he's doing the right thing by standing up for Rebecca, but a few of Luke's longtime friends defend him. His college roommate sends Thomas a long message saying Rebecca must have done something to provoke Luke's behavior, that men don't just track their wives for no reason. Thomas blocks him without responding. Rebecca finds a one-bedroom apartment 3 miles from our office. The building is new with modern appliances and a small balcony overlooking a park. She signs the lease using only her income for the application. The leasing agent congratulates her on her credit score and stable employment. Rebecca cries in the leasing office parking lot after getting her keys. She tells me it's the first place that's truly hers, where no one can tell her what to do or monitor her coming and going. Thomas and I help her move in the following weekend. She doesn't have much since she only took clothes and personal items from her marriage. We spend Saturday shopping for furniture, and Rebecca picks out everything herself without asking for opinions or approval. Frederick, Luke's lawyer, contacts Ramona trying to negotiate. Luke wants to settle the divorce quickly and avoid going to court. The restraining order violation and arrest record make him look bad, and he knows it. Frederick offers Rebecca a fair division of assets if she'll agree to keep the details of their marriage confidential. He suggests a non-disclosure agreement that would prevent Rebecca from discussing Luke's behavior with anyone outside of legal proceedings. The settlement offer includes the house, half the retirement accounts, and 3 years of spousal support. Rebecca meets with Ramona to discuss the offer. Ramona says it's actually a generous settlement and Luke is clearly motivated to avoid public court proceedings. Rebecca asks what would happen if she refuses the non-disclosure agreement. Ramona explains the divorce would go to court and become public record. Anyone could access the court documents and testimony. Rebecca sits quietly for a minute thinking. Then she tells Ramona she won't sign anything that keeps Luke's behavior private. She says other women should know what Luke is capable of before they get involved with him. She wants the divorce proceedings to be completely public record. Ramona supports the decision and says the evidence they have strongly favors Rebecca getting what she wants even in court. The location tracking, the financial control, the documented spending notebook, the threatening messages, the restraining order violation. All of it paints a clear picture that will influence any judge. Rebecca seems relieved to have made the decision. She tells Ramona she spent 10 years being quiet and controlled, and she's done protecting Luke from consequences. At work, word spreads about the situation. Some of Luke's professional contacts do business with my company, and they hear about the restraining order and arrest. 2 clients specifically request not to work with Luke anymore on future projects. One client tells our account manager that they can't have someone with domestic abuse issues representing their company. Luke's boss calls Thomas asking what happened because Luke's behavior is affecting their business relationships. Thomas explains the situation honestly, and Luke's boss thanks him for the information. A week later, we hear through mutual friends that Luke got put on a performance improvement plan at work. His work performance drops so bad that management notices within days. Thomas gets another call from Luke's boss asking more questions about what happened. Thomas sits at our kitchen table with his phone on speaker and explains everything calmly. He describes the location tracking, the financial control, the restraining order violation, the arrest. Luke's boss listens quietly and thanks Thomas for being honest about the situation. The boss says he needs to know these things because Luke's representing their company to clients. Thomas hangs up and looks relieved that he told the truth instead of covering for his former friend. A week passes and we start hearing things through people we both know. Luke got put on a performance improvement plan at his job. His boss is documenting everything because Luke's obsession with the divorce is affecting his work. He's missing deadlines, showing up late, leaving early to deal with lawyers. 2 more clients requested different account managers after hearing about his personal issues. His company is losing money because Luke can't focus on anything except his crumbling reputation. Rebecca and I meet for lunch at a cafe near our office. She looks different now, more confident in how she sits and makes eye contact. She orders without hesitating or asking if her choice is okay. Over salads, she tells me she's been thinking about going back to the school for her bachelor's degree in accounting. The company's tuition program will cover most of the cost, and she's excited about taking that next step. I encourage her immediately and offer to write a recommendation letter for the program. She smiles and says she's already looking at class schedules for next semester. Watching her plan her own future without asking permission from anyone makes me proud of how far she's come. Thomas starts seeing a therapist the following week. The therapist's name is Julian, and he specializes in helping people process relationship issues and personal growth. Thomas goes to his first appointment nervous about talking to a stranger about his feelings. He comes home 2 hours later looking exhausted but lighter somehow. Over dinner, he tells me Julian helped him understand that Luke's comments about gender roles were always problematic, but got worse over time. Thomas says he normalized toxic masculinity patterns because Luke was his best friend, and he didn't want to see the warning signs. Julian is helping him recognize those patterns so he doesn't fall into them again. 3 months after the birthday dinner disaster, Rebecca's divorce goes to court. Luke refused to agree to any settlement terms that didn't include the non-disclosure agreement. He wants to keep everything private, but Rebecca won't back down. The courtroom is cold and formal with wooden benches and a judge who looks tired. Rebecca takes the witness stand and testifies about 10 years of financial control. She describes how Luke tracked her location through her phone without her knowledge. She talks about the notebook where he documented every dollar she spent and criticized her purchases. She shows the threatening messages he sent after she left. The judge listens carefully and asks several questions about the tracking software. His face shows clear disturbance as Rebecca explains how Luke monitored her movements for years. Luke's lawyer tries to make it sound like normal marriage stuff, but the judge isn't buying it. The evidence is too detailed and too disturbing. The judge rules heavily in Rebecca's favor after hearing everything. Rebecca gets the house they shared for 10 years. She gets half of Luke's retirement accounts that he thought were his alone. She gets spousal support for 3 years while she completes her degree. The judge specifically mentions that Luke's controlling behavior and tracking of Rebecca without consent influenced his decision. He says financial abuse is serious and the tracking behavior was particularly concerning. Luke sits at the defendant's table looking furious but completely defeated. His face is red and his hands are clenched into fists. But there's nothing he can do. The judge's ruling is final, and Luke has to accept that he lost everything he tried so hard to control. After the divorce finalizes 2 weeks later, Rebecca hosts a small celebration dinner at her new apartment. She invites me, Thomas, Katie from work, and Ramona, her lawyer. The apartment is modest, but it's completely hers, and she decorated it exactly how she wanted. We bring wine and food, and Rebecca gives a toast in her living room. She thanks everyone for helping her build a new life, and says she's happier now than she's been in 15 years. Her voice cracks a little, but she's smiling. Katie hugs her and says she's proud to work with someone so strong. Ramona raises her glass and says Rebecca's case will help other women recognize controlling behavior. Thomas tells Rebecca she's brave for going through with the public court proceedings. I just squeeze her hand because she knows what I'm thinking. Luke makes one final attempt to contact Thomas through a mutual friend named Dave. Dave calls Thomas and says Luke wants to talk and rebuild their friendship. Luke apparently told Dave that he's learned from his mistakes and wants to apologize. Thomas listens to Dave's whole pitch and then says no. He sends back a message through Dave saying he can't have someone in his life who believes controlling and tracking your spouse is acceptable behavior. Dave tries to argue that everyone deserves second chances, but Thomas stands firm. Dave calls back a few days later and tells us Luke didn't respond after getting Thomas's message. Thomas seems relieved that he set that boundary clearly. Thomas and I start marriage counseling with Julian to address the damage Luke's influence caused in our relationship. We sit in Julian's office once a week and talk about things we've avoided discussing for months. Thomas works through his insecurities about my income and success. He admits he let Luke's comments make him feel less important in our marriage. I learn to better communicate when something bothers me instead of letting resentment build up inside. Julian helps us have honest conversations about expectations and support. Our marriage grows stronger through these sessions. We start talking openly about feelings and fears we used to hide from each other. 6 months after everything started, I get promoted again to vice president of the regional division. My boss calls me into her office and offers me the position with a significant raise. Thomas is genuinely excited and proud when I tell him. He takes me out to celebrate that night at an expensive restaurant downtown. There's no tension or passive-aggressive comments about my success. He toasts to my achievement and tells the waiter his wife just became a vice president. In our next counseling session with Julian, Thomas talks about how watching Rebecca's transformation helped him understand something important. He says my success doesn't diminish him. It just means we're both strong people building a life together. Julian nods and says that's real growth. Rebecca completes her first semester of bachelor's classes with a perfect grade average while working full-time. She's exhausted but thriving, balancing coursework and her accounting supervisor role. She tells me she's considering eventually getting her CPA certification once she finishes her degree. Katie mentions to me at work that Rebecca's being considered for a management training program. The program could put her on track to become a department supervisor within 2 years. I watch Rebecca in meetings now and see someone completely different from the scared woman who used to ask permission for everything. She speaks up confidently, and her team respects her decisions. Luke tried so hard to keep her small and controlled, but she's building something he can never take away from her. A few weeks later, I heard from our neighbor Diane that Luke had moved across town to an apartment near the industrial district. She mentioned it while we were both getting mail, saying she'd seen him loading boxes into a truck with some woman she didn't recognize. Diane said the woman looked young, maybe mid-20s, and seemed really into Luke based on how she kept touching his arm and laughing at everything he said. I felt my stomach tighten because I knew exactly how Luke operated, and this woman had no idea what she was getting into. Over the next month, more neighbors mentioned seeing Luke around town with his new girlfriend. Apparently, he was telling people he'd left Rebecca because she became too career-focused and neglected their marriage. He was spinning the whole story to make himself look like the victim of a wife who chose work over family. 3 different people told me they'd warned the new girlfriend about Luke's history, explaining about the restraining order and the divorce proceedings. Nobody knew if she listened or believed them. When I told Rebecca about it during one of our coffee meetings, she stirred her drink slowly and stared out the window for a minute. She said she hoped the woman was safe, but she couldn't spend energy trying to save people from Luke anymore. She'd learned that people have to want to see the truth about someone, and sometimes they need to figure it out themselves the hard way. Thomas ran into Luke's father, Kelvin, at the hardware store on a Saturday morning. Thomas was picking up supplies for a bathroom repair when Kelvin approached him near the paint section. Thomas told me later that Kelvin's face was red and angry, and he immediately started talking about how I had destroyed Luke's life and marriage. Kelvin said Luke had been a good husband until I came along and poisoned Rebecca against him, filling her head with feminist nonsense about careers and independence. He claimed Luke was depressed and struggling financially because of the divorce settlement I'd orchestrated. Thomas stood there holding a paint roller while Kelvin went on about how women like me were destroying traditional families and turning wives against their husbands. Thomas waited until Kelvin finished talking, then said very calmly that Luke had destroyed his own marriage through controlling and abusive behavior. He explained that tracking your wife's location without her knowledge and controlling all her finances wasn't traditional marriage, it was abuse. Kelvin's face got even redder and he started to argue, but Thomas just walked away toward the checkout line. When Thomas got home and told me about it, he seemed lighter somehow. He said he used to feel guilty about ending the friendship with Luke, wondering if he'd abandoned someone who needed help. But talking to Kelvin made him realize that Luke's whole family enabled his behavior and made excuses for his need to control women. Thomas said he felt no guilt anymore about cutting Luke out of his life completely. Rebecca got the acceptance letter for the management training program on a Wednesday afternoon. She called me from her car in the parking lot at work, practically screaming with excitement. The program would start in 3 months and run for 18 weeks, combining classroom instruction with hands-on project management experience. Katie had nominated Rebecca for the program after watching her handle increasingly complex accounting projects with multiple departments. Rebecca was making almost double what Luke earned now at his new lower-level job. She'd been saving aggressively, putting away nearly 40% of each paycheck into her personal accounts. When we met for lunch that Friday, Rebecca spread out printouts of houses for sale in nice neighborhoods near good schools. She said she'd been thinking about buying her own house next year instead of continuing to rent her apartment. The idea of owning property, of having something that was completely hers that nobody could take away or control, made her eyes bright with possibility. She showed me a 3-bedroom house with a big backyard and said she could see herself there, maybe even having room for her sister and nieces if they needed a place to stay. I watched her plan her future with this confidence and independence she never had before, and it reminded me why I'd helped her in the first place. My boss, Sarah, called me into her office on a Monday morning and asked if I'd be interested in speaking at a women's leadership conference in 3 months. The conference focused on mentoring and supporting other women in their careers, and Sarah thought my work with Rebecca would make a powerful example. I agreed immediately because I believed other women needed to hear that professional opportunities could change lives beyond just paychecks and titles. That evening, I called Rebecca and asked if she'd be willing to share her story as part of my presentation. There was silence on the phone for almost a minute while she thought about it. She finally said she'd been thinking a lot about other women in situations like hers, women who didn't know they had options or paths to independence. She wanted to help other women recognize the patterns of financial abuse before they spent 10 years trapped like she had. Rebecca said she'd do the presentation if we could focus on practical steps women could take to build careers and financial independence while navigating controlling relationships. We spent the next few weeks preparing our presentation, meeting at coffee shops to outline talking points and practice our delivery. The conference took place at a downtown hotel with about 200 women attending from various industries and career levels. Rebecca and I presented together in a breakout session titled Creating Pathways to Independence. I talked about how companies could support employees who might be in controlling relationships by offering tuition assistance, flexible scheduling, and confidential financial planning resources. Rebecca shared her story, explaining how she'd hidden her career development from Luke for 8 months while building the skills and savings she needed to leave safely. She talked about the importance of having your own bank account, understanding your credit score, and knowing your legal rights in marriage. The response was overwhelming. Women lined up afterward to talk to us, some crying as they described situations similar to what Rebecca had experienced. Dozens of women asked for our contact information, saying they wanted to learn more about building careers while preparing to leave controlling partners. 3 different women asked if they could connect with Rebecca directly for advice on their specific situations. We stayed an extra hour after the session ended, talking to women and exchanging information. Rebecca handed out her business card to everyone who asked, offering to mentor women who were trying to build professional skills and financial independence. 3 women from the conference reached out to me the following week asking if my company had other positions available. They were all in situations similar to what Rebecca had experienced, with partners who controlled their finances and limited their career options. I forwarded their information to Nicole in HR and explained the situation. Nicole interviewed all 3 women, and 2 of them got hired within the month, 1 in customer service and 1 in data entry. Both positions offered the tuition assistance program and opportunities for advancement. Rebecca immediately volunteered to mentor them as they navigated building careers while preparing to leave their controlling partners. She met with each woman individually, sharing resources about opening separate bank accounts, understanding divorce law, and finding safe places to stay if needed. I watched Rebecca guide these women through the same process I'd guided her through, and it created this ripple effect of women supporting women that kept expanding. Thomas told Julian in their next therapy session that he was grateful the situation with Luke happened because it forced him to examine his own attitudes about gender and success. He said he'd spent years absorbing Luke's toxic messages about masculinity and marriage without questioning them. The whole experience of watching Rebecca transform and nearly losing his own marriage made him realize how much harmful thinking he'd internalized. He told Julian he'd become a better husband and person through the process of unlearning all that garbage about men needing to be providers and women needing to be supporters. Julian listened and then suggested Thomas might benefit from joining a men's group focused on healthy masculinity. The group met weekly and discussed topics like emotional intelligence, partnership in relationships, and rejecting toxic male stereotypes. Thomas seemed interested but nervous about joining a group where he'd have to share personal experiences. Julian explained that many men struggled with the same issues Thomas was working through, and having community support could accelerate his growth. Thomas agreed to try one meeting and see how it felt. Rebecca closed on her first house 4 months after the divorce was finalized. The house was a small 3-bedroom ranch with hardwood floors and a fenced backyard. She'd bought it entirely with her own income and savings, something she never imagined possible 2 years earlier. Thomas and I helped her move in on a Saturday, loading boxes and furniture while Rebecca directed where everything should go. She kept stopping in different rooms and saying she couldn't believe this was really hers, that she owned this house and nobody could tell her what to do in it or take it away from her. Her sister arrived in the afternoon with her 2 nieces, carrying suitcases and bags of belongings. Rebecca had invited them to live with her because her sister was also leaving a controlling relationship and needed a safe place to stay. Watching Rebecca help her sister escape the same kind of situation she'd been in showed how far she'd come. She wasn't the scared woman who needed permission anymore. She was the woman who owned her own house and helped other women find their way out. A year after the birthday dinner confrontation, my marriage was stronger than it had been in years. Thomas and I communicated openly about feelings and insecurities instead of letting outside voices influence us or letting resentment build up silently. The weekly therapy sessions with Julian had taught us how to have difficult conversations without attacking each other. Thomas was proud of my success now, genuinely excited when I got promoted or closed a big deal. He'd tell people at parties that his wife was brilliant and accomplished, with none of the insecurity that Luke had tried to cultivate in him. I was proud of Thomas too, proud of the work he'd put into becoming a better partner and examining his own attitudes about gender and success. We'd both grown through this whole situation, learned things about ourselves and each other that made our relationship deeper. On our anniversary, Thomas took me to dinner at an expensive restaurant and gave a toast thanking me for being patient, while he unlearned harmful ideas about marriage. He said watching me succeed professionally while supporting Rebecca's growth taught him what real strength looked like. Rebecca got promoted to accounting supervisor 3 months later, overseeing a team of 5 people. She was making triple what she'd earned as a receptionist and had built a professional reputation completely separate from her past as Luke's controlled wife. Her team respected her decisions and came to her with complex problems because they trusted her judgment. Katie told me Rebecca was considered for another promotion to senior supervisor within the year. During one of our coffee meetings, Rebecca said something that stuck with me. She told me she sometimes forgot she was ever that scared woman who couldn't make decisions without permission, who had to hide her location and change clothes in her car to have a job. Her old life felt like it had happened to someone else entirely. She'd built this whole new identity as a successful professional, a homeowner, a mentor to other women, and that's who she was now. I heard about Luke getting fired through Katie at work, who'd heard it from someone in his company's HR department. A woman he worked with filed a complaint about comments he made about working mothers, saying they were less committed to their jobs and shouldn't be in leadership positions. The company investigated and found a pattern of similar complaints from other female coworkers over the years. They let him go, and he ended up taking a lower-level position at a different company, making significantly less money. Rebecca told me she felt bad for whoever had to work with him now, but she wasn't responsible for his choices anymore. She'd spent 10 years trying to manage his behavior and attitudes, and it wasn't her job to fix him. Thomas started attending a men's group that Julian recommended, meeting every other week with other guys working through issues around masculinity and relationships. He'd come home from meetings energized and thoughtful, talking about things like emotional intelligence and what it means to be a real partner instead of just a provider. One night, he told me about a discussion they had about vulnerability and how he'd always thought showing feelings made him weak. He said watching me succeed professionally while supporting Rebecca's growth taught him what actual strength looked like. I could see how much he'd changed from the man who almost returned a car because his friend said it was emasculating. He was doing the work to become better, and it showed in how he talked about our relationship now. Rebecca started dating someone she met through a work connection, another accountant who'd moved to our area for a job. She was cautious at first, telling me she wasn't sure she wanted to get involved with anyone after what she'd been through with Luke. But this guy was different. He asked about her career goals and seemed genuinely impressed by her ambitions. She told me about their first few dates and how he'd asked thoughtful questions about her work, and listened when she talked about wanting to eventually become a CPA. She said she was using everything she learned from her marriage to Luke to recognize healthy relationship patterns. She knew what red flags to watch for now, and she wouldn't settle for anything less than a true partnership. I was proud of how carefully she was approaching it, not rushing into anything but staying open to the possibility. My company's executive team approached me about creating a formal program for helping employees escape domestic abuse situations. They wanted to offer resources, legal support, and financial planning assistance after hearing about Rebecca's story and how the company had helped her build independence. They asked if Rebecca would be willing to help develop the program and share her experience. I talked to Rebecca about it, and she agreed immediately. She said if her story could help even one other woman get out of a controlling situation, it would be worth sharing the painful details. She met with the HR team and legal department multiple times over the next few months, helping them understand what resources would have been most helpful when she was planning to leave Luke. The program launched 6 months later, with Rebecca's input shaping every aspect of it. Thomas and I celebrated our anniversary at the same restaurant where we'd had our first date years ago. He gave a toast thanking me for being patient while he unlearned harmful ideas about marriage and gender roles. He said he was grateful Luke's toxic influence got exposed because it forced him to examine his own attitudes and become a better partner. He told me watching me succeed professionally while supporting Rebecca's growth showed him what real strength looked like, that it wasn't about control or dominance but about lifting people up. I told him I was proud of the work he'd put into becoming a better partner, that I saw how hard he was trying and it meant everything to me. We talked about how much stronger our marriage was now compared to a few years ago, when Luke's words were creating distance between us. We'd both grown through this whole situation and learned things about ourselves that made our relationship deeper. Rebecca completed her bachelor's degree in accounting while working full-time, taking night classes and weekend sessions for 2 years straight. She got promoted again to senior accounting supervisor, managing a team of 12 people and making more than double what Luke earned now. The day she graduated, she invited Thomas and me to the ceremony, and we watched her walk across the stage to get her diploma. She was crying happy tears, and so was I. She framed that diploma and hung it in her home office as a reminder of everything she'd accomplished. Katie told me Rebecca's team loved working for her because she understood what it was like to feel underestimated, and she made sure everyone on her team got opportunities to grow. 2 years after the birthday dinner confrontation, Rebecca's sister left her controlling partner with Rebecca's financial and emotional support. Her sister had been in a similar situation, with a boyfriend who controlled her money and monitored her whereabouts. Rebecca helped her sister find a job, opened a separate bank account for her, and let her stay in the spare bedroom until she saved enough for her own place. Watching Rebecca help her sister escape the same kind of situation she'd been in showed how far she'd come. She wasn't the scared woman who needed permission anymore, or who was too afraid to disable tracking software on her own phone. She was the woman who owned her own house and helped other women find their way out. The cycle of control ended with Rebecca's courage to leave and her willingness to help others do the same. Thomas and I decided to renew our vows in a small ceremony with close friends and family. We wrote our own vows focusing on partnership, mutual respect, and supporting each other's growth. I promised to keep communicating openly about my feelings instead of letting resentment build. Thomas promised to keep examining his own attitudes and biases and to celebrate my success instead of feeling threatened by it. Rebecca was there celebrating with us, and several people commented on how strong and happy our marriage looked now. It felt like we were starting fresh with a deeper understanding of what we meant to each other and what kind of partnership we wanted to build. Rebecca got engaged to her boyfriend after a year of dating. She called me right after he proposed, excited and a little nervous. She said she never thought she'd want to get married again after Luke, but this felt completely different from her first marriage. She was confident and clear about her boundaries and expectations, and he respected and supported her completely. They talked openly about finances, career goals, and what they wanted their life together to look like. She told me she wouldn't have been able to recognize a healthy relationship if she hadn't gone through everything with Luke and learned what she deserved. She said leaving Luke was the hardest thing she'd ever done, but it led to the best version of her life. My career kept advancing, and I was considered for an executive vice president position that would oversee multiple regions. Thomas was my biggest cheerleader, helping me prepare for interviews and celebrating each step forward. He'd tell people proudly that his wife was brilliant and accomplished, with no trace of the insecurity Luke tried to cultivate in him years ago. He'd brag about my achievements to his friends and family, and I could see he genuinely meant it. The man who once considered returning a car because his friends said it was emasculating, now celebrated every promotion and success I earned. We'd both come so far from where we were when Luke was poisoning our marriage with his toxic ideas about gender roles and success. I stood on,